Welcome to UC Today. My name is David Dungay. I'm here today with Jonathan Bean from Sinch. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. How are you today?
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. Yeah, really pleased to be here and chatting with you.
Excellent. So, Jonathan, today we're going to be talking about CPaaS and Conversational AI. Where should we start? Let's start right at the beginning. Give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and the business.
Yeah, so I head up the marketing organization here at Sinch. Sinch is a CPaaS and cloud communications provider doing about 107 billion engagements globally. Got operations in 42 countries. A bit about myself. I've spent a career in the software game, primarily on the marketing side, the marketing software area. And about 2 years ago, I came across into the CPaaS or cloud communications area, primarily because I'd spent a career in organizations that had used sort of email as their major sort of outreach mechanism, and saw this whole area of CPaaS as a very exciting area for both companies and consumers to, have a better life and also, be more competitive. So that's what brought me into the CPaaS world.
Excellent. Okay, well, look, CPaaS, incredibly relevant right now, especially after the year we've just had, 2020. I'm sure probably a year everyone would rather forget, but for this type of technology, it's been particularly pertinent. Tell us a little bit about 2020. How's it been for Sinch, and what are some of the areas you've got involved with over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think if someone had asked me back at the beginning of 2020, would that type of year end up as it has, I would have said that. They were dreaming. But I think we've learned so much in 2020. Consumer behavior has been completely transformed, I would say, and that type of behavior is here to stay. I think Sinch, it's been a huge journey for us as a company in terms of the amount of engagements and really seeing customers using different types of use cases and have to get closer to their customers. I think when all business leaders were confronted by the pandemic and what they needed to do, there was a couple of things that I think were front and center of their minds. One was, how could they get closer to their employees? The other was, how could they get closer to their customers and suppliers? And I think, we all sat there, and I was, having calls with, all of our different customers around the world, some of their C-levels, and talking about, how these things were impacting them. And I think what it did was open up new ways of thinking and communicating, and it forced what companies had been thinking about doing over the next 5 years. They just needed to implement that over the next 5 months. So we saw it, we were right at the brunt, at the beginning when travel was impacted, for example, and travel companies needed to get in, everything from cruise liners to airlines needed to get in touch with their consumers. How could they really accelerate that customer experience on that? Then, of course, we had, the technology companies that were suddenly, had to provide a whole new working from home experience to, millions and billions of people around the world. Then we had, financial services companies that were having to, completely change their terms and conditions with their customers. No longer was it just a kind of, a fraud alert that they would send out, or a one-time password. It was talking about changes of loan conditions and stuff like that and wanting action. Then we had, retailers, of course, going completely online, and how could they, being forced to do that, and how could they take advantage of that? And probably most importantly, healthcare companies or healthcare regulators or healthcare government organizations having to rearrange the world's healthcare appointments because of COVID. And now, obviously, what we're doing a lot of work is on all the vaccination programs around the world for those sort of lucky countries that have access to vaccinations, making sure that those vaccination programs are delivered on time and reach the right people and have an action. So I think, we were impacted, hugely in that area. I think a couple of things that come out for me about CPaaS and 2020 is, one, showing the global nature of this. Has not been one country in the world that hasn't been affected by this pandemic. Some have handled it better than others. And I think, Sinch has offices in 42 different markets. So we really saw how the pandemic was affecting different countries in different ways. But in terms of how they were using communications, I would say that 2020 was probably the year that CPaaS came of age, so to speak. Yeah.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, so CPaaS, omnichannel, these are, as you said, these are places businesses were looking to get to perhaps over the coming years. But I mean, would you say on the whole, we're there now? It's the time of CPaaS, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different levels of CPaaS, and I'm not going to go into the whole Gartner stack that they've come up. I think what 2020 proved is, with all good technology shifts, you want to deploy, CPaaS solutions which are relatively simple to deploy. You want to deploy, solutions and use cases that can get you quick ROI. And you want to use relatively simple things. And I think the pandemic, the urgency that the pandemic forced was not these big, complex, customer experience and customer journey projects that could take multiple years. It was, how can I get a message out to a person that needs to change a healthcare appointment or a travel plan? Relatively simple use cases. Financial institutions that, have been very much focused on one-time passwords or verification of their users suddenly had to interact with those customers, tell them about their loan terms changing, and needing some sort of favorability. So I think a lot is talked about in terms of CPaaS. There's very different layers in terms of foundational CPaaS, in terms of messaging. But if you look at the messaging layer, which is a relatively foundational part of CPaaS, that was really put front and center, because this was not an IoT application, for example. This was a messaging need that companies had. And so a couple of things, the focus on CPaaS global and the scalability that is needed by a lot of companies to reach out to billions of people. And then, just the ease of use that, once these use cases are deployed, you have a proof of concept, you have return on investment, and then you can build your next CPaaS use case. And let's not forget, this is a young industry. This didn't exist, a few years ago. So we're all sort of building a category together and hopefully, making people's lives, both businesses and more importantly, consumers, simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, clearly, the mobile messaging element of that was, it's played a huge role. I think we've all experienced that from the various brands, and here in the UK, the NHS track and trace system. It's been a great tool, if you like, to really connect with customers. One element I'd really like to talk about is conversational AI, though. What are you seeing there, and how is that particular technology transforming some of these interactions you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think you've got two very different topics there. You've got, the whole element of two-way communication, of conversations. And then you've got the layer of AI that brings on, and maybe we can sort of tackle it in those two different areas. I think what we observed as well, we've done sort of big consumer studies, every year over the past couple of years, is there's a huge sort of opportunity or a gap there in expectations. Consumers expect to be engaged on the channels of their choice, but they're not being today with brands. And I think one of the reasons is, in terms of communications, email really has dominated over the last 10 years. And consumers tell us they would like to be, whether it's a healthcare reminder, whether it's a financial services, announcement, whether it is a retail, service announcement. They want much more personal experiences and much more two-way experiences. So I think that the whole conversational side, there's an opportunity gap there. Consumers say they want that type of interaction, but they don't say that's being, provided by brands or technology providers today. I think that's a bit unfair. I think there are some companies and some technology providers that are doing great things, but it's set to grow over the next few years. I think on the conversational space, if you couple this, let's sit back a little bit and think about, there are 7 billion mobile users, in the world today. there are over 3 billion users of messaging apps. The last 10 years in mobile has very much been about app development and developing into apps. But really, when 5%, 10% of your customer base has taken up your apps if you're outside of services like financial services. But if you look at the messaging space and the growth of all of these messaging apps, whether it be WhatsApp, whether it be Facebook Messenger, whether it be Kakao in Korea, Line in Japan, WeChat in China, these are now the areas that companies are looking at and saying, how can we engage our consumers on the same channels that those consumers engage their friends? So I think the big change in conversations is the channel side, and is also the two-way side. Sinch comes from a background in SMS, in A to P, and that was always a very one-way relationship. Actually, now both brands and consumers have a way to really drive value through that two-way conversation. And then on the AI side, if you layer that sort of level of AI on top, what it enables companies to do is automate a hell of a lot of their experiences, and I say automate in a very good way. This ecosystem is very, very complex. All of these different messaging channels in all of these different geographies and cultures. So one of the most important things when you go into this new conversational era is actually being able to interpret all of these responses that you get back from your messages, and what response do you need to give back at scale. So a good example of that is, we have a product called Chatlayer, which basically automates a lot of these responses in 125 different languages. Wow. And learns what the majority of people for a particular use case are asking. So we'll offer that. I think another area that's important, though, because a lot of talked about AI, is we have seen that we've hired more and more conversational designers to help companies basically understand what a conversation is. It's very easy with an email, right? An email, you write it, you have a headline, you have some body text, you might have a call to action. We've been doing that for, let's be fair and say, over a decade. But conversational technologies and how we might converse with a friend versus how we might converse with a business, I think we're just really in the early days there of businesses understanding exactly that. And then also different channels have their different, their different nuances, let's say. Okay. So I think our mission is about simplifying that experience for companies that are just entering this space, or even that have been messaging for years.
Okay, I mean, if we could encapsulate that, those challenges, particularly the enterprise are trying to solve right now. We'll have a lot of people watching this today, thinking, I know I need to connect with my customer base in more meaningful ways across these different sort of ecosystems, if you like. What really should they be thinking about? Can you encapsulate that in a sort of a quick fire summary?
Quick fire summary, always useful, always challenging, right? But I think what they need to do is, so many companies that I go into have this wonderful customer journey PowerPoint slide that everyone has, right? And they say, we've got the customer journey completely sort of figured out. Often what I find when we talk with customers is there are some major pain points in that customer journey. And it's probably because there's a whole spaghetti web of technology behind that wonderful PowerPoint that need to talk to each other. There's a number of different geographies. I realize not every company is a global, enterprise. But, they'll have different countries often that they're dealing with and different cultures. And the temptation is sort of one size fits all, and it often doesn't, right? So, the best bit of advice I would say is, pick a use case that is relatively simple, like we've seen in a lot of the pandemic communications, and, try something out there with CPaaS or with messaging to solve that problem, and then measure the KPIs that you have on that versus another communication method that you may look of. When we find that companies, doesn't matter what sector you're dealing with, they often have been communicating via email to their customer base, right? And it could be a particular, point in that customer journey, whether it be acquisition or service delivery or customer support. And when they do a messaging program, whether that be, SMS, RCS, trials on WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, the change when they compare what they were achieving by email and what they were achieving, with a messaging is just fundamentally different and impressive. And I've been with some people, both executives and people in the operational functions that are saying, how do I actually explain this? This difference that we have in messaging, because we've never seen this before. But it's not that unusual. Emails have, if you're lucky, a 25% open rate. Messaging in all its forms has a 98% open rate and a 90% read rate within 3 minutes. So it's not unusual that, messaging is such a powerful a powerful mechanism for companies to deploy. And if you look at the powerful mechanism for companies, and then you look at the customer experience that it delivers for you and me, who are used to talking to our friends or our family on those type of messaging apps, then you have, I think, some of the answer why CPaaS has become such a important and growing market over the last 12 months and is set to do so over the next few years.
Okay, well, I mean, let's talk about the next few years. Obviously, the technology has taken a huge leap forward in 2020. 2021, I mean, looks much the same. What are we going to see from the market? What are we going to see, more importantly, from Sinch, and how you're addressing some of the changes going on over the following year or couple of years?
So I think, companies going into 2021, I mean, let's take Gartner's take on the whole CPaaS market. I think they said that global enterprises, if I can remember it right, will be seeing CPaaS APIs as a source of competitive advantage. 90% of global enterprises will see CPaaS APIs as a source of competitive advantage. That is up from 20% just a year ago. So that number that Gartner put together caused me to sort of sit back. So I think we will see a huge number of companies start to enter this space and bring on talent that understands this and work with providers like Sinch that can deliver these type of solutions at scale globally. So you've just got this movement, because a lot of companies have been forced to digitalize. Their mobile customer experience, their digital mobile customer experience is in a completely different place to where it was 12 months ago. And probably the ambitions of both their organization and, more importantly, the expectations of their consumers need to be met. So we'll see that. I think what you'll also start to find is this area of next generation messaging, or if you're in the market, OTT channels, chat apps will become more and more important, and people will start to understand that more. When they delve into that, what they'll find out is it's complex. Every channel is relatively unique. Dealing with that is a complex challenge. If you haven't started SMS today, or if you're in SMS, that is one challenge across different markets. We deliver to hundreds and hundreds of markets. It's different in every single market, but relatively the same compared to, let's say, a WhatsApp template, or a Viber if you're dealing with that, or KakaoTalk in Korea, or WeChat in China. That's why, what you see from Sinch is we've recently launched our Conversation API, which is one single API, which delivers connectivity to multiple channels to make sure that this experience can be implemented by tech teams, both at technology platforms and also enterprises themselves. Very simple. So one API, which basically reaches all channels, SMS, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, MMS, Viber, all of those channels in one. And I think that's what you're going to see more and more companies doing, and then learning from their consumers. Okay, what is the channel of choice for that particular consumer? They'll learn, and they will improve that customer experience. So I think I'm extremely excited to see what customers do as a result of this digital transformation that they're going at, they're achieving at accelerated pace. At the same time, I think they need to take advantage of extremely easy solutions and easy use cases to get those first sort of proof of concepts, and then become more mature in this space.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clearly going to be it's a fascinating time for the industry, and there's so much opportunity. And it's great to see, CPaaS become a normal part of the vernacular, if you like, of all those customers now. It's absolutely great. Well, look, Jonathan, I think that's a great place to end today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, David. Take care.
And thank you for watching. You've been watching UC Today with me, David Dungay. See you next time.